They believed a debt could be paid in collars. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the human frigate Accountability, the recycled air tasting of ozone and cold focus. Around her, the bridge was a sphere of silent, disciplined motion, a stark contrast to the scene projected on the main lumen display. A fleet of Kirin hegemony warships, blades of obsidian and hostile crimson light formed a perfect, unyielding blockade. They were sharks in the void, and her convoy of civilian transports was the bleeding swimmer. The stakes were 27,000 souls, a fledgling colony, and a principle humanity had paid dearly to establish. Praetor Vex has repeated his terms, Admiral. Communications Officer Wren said, his voice flat, betraying no emotion. Full compliance with the ultimatum doctrine. 1/10 of the colony's population and resources are to be tithed as payment for trespassing in a contested zone. Rostova's eyes narrowed. Trespassing. She murmured the word, a poison on her tongue. The zone was neutral by treaty, a fact the Kirin had conveniently ignored. Solon the timer. The cool, synthesized voice of the fleet mind filled the space. The Praetor's grace period expires in 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 41 seconds, Admiral. His doctrine is absolute. He expects our surrender or our destruction. That was their first mistake. Rostova watched the crimson icons of the enemy. They were arranged in a classic hammer formation, designed to shatter any attempt at a direct breakout. It was arrogant textbook and utterly predictable. The Kirin were warriors of the ultimatum, a culture that saw negotiation as weakness and mercy as an error in calculation. They presented a bill and expected payment in assets or in blood. They never considered the possibility of a counteroffer. Yorick, what are our odds on a direct burn? Rostova asked, turning to her tactical officer. Yorick, a man whose jaw seemed permanently set for a fight, shook his head. Low, Admiral. Their intercept vectors are locked. We might get the warships through, but the transports would be shredded. They're fat, slow, and full of the people we're sworn to protect. He gestured to a secondary screen showing heat blooms from the enemy engines. They're burning hot, ready to move at a moment's notice. We burned smarter, not hotter. Down in the aft section of the transport vessel Starglider, a young girl named Alara pressed her face against the thick, plas crystal viewport. She wasn't watching the terrifying enemy ships, but the small darting lights of the human escort corvettes. They moved like fireflies weaving a complex silent dance in the darkness. Her mother had told her they were the guardians drawing a line in the stars that no monster could cross. The hum of the ship's life support was a constant gentle pressure against her ears, a sound she had always found comforting, but which now felt thin and fragile. The Praetor's formation is 99.7% doctrinally perfect, Solon announced, his voice cutting through the low thrum of the bridge. There is, however, an anomaly. One ship, the Blade of Judgment, is holding position 3,000 kilometers aft of its designated anchor point. It is also running 10% colder than its sister ships. A mystery. Rostova seized it. A command vessel. Most probable, Solon confirmed. The Praetor is likely aboard observing his perfect trap. The lower energy signature suggests a diversion of power, perhaps to enhanced command and control or personal life support. Arrogance had a heat signature. It was a cold spot on a hot line. He wants a good view of the surrender, Jorik growled. He's going to get a very different kind of show. Rostova countered, a spark of ice in her eyes. Wren, open a channel to the Corvette squadron. Tell them to deploy the lattice. Full spread primary patterns. And Solon, I want you to make our ghost fleet look very, very real. The void itself would become our mirror. The command went out, a ripple of light speed data. From the bellies of the human corvettes, A swarm of tiny projectors burst forth, unfurling into a vast, shimmering web. This was the mirror lattice, a technology born not of a desire to destroy, but to deceive. It was an artist's brush for the canvas of war painting, lies with light and energy. Each projector began to emit false signals, carefully calibrated by Solon, to mimic the energy signatures of the entire human fleet. On the Cairn flagship, Praetor Vex watched his tactical display with immense satisfaction. Just as his ancestors had done, he had presented an unassailable front. He had issued a clear ultimatum. The lesser species would now break as they always did. Then his screens flickered. A dozen new contacts appeared, then 100. The human fleet, which had been holding a tight, defensive posture, suddenly seemed to swell to 10 times its size. "Impossible!" his tactical officer shouted. "They are charging a suicide run." Vex leaned forward, his lipless mouth a thin line. It was illogical, a desperate, pathetic gesture. He gave the order. "All ships fire at will on the primary mass. Teach them the price of defiance." They were shooting at reflections in a pond. Crimson lances of energy tore through the vacuum aimed at the heart of the ghost fleet. They struck nothing but carefully constructed illusions. The mirror lattice absorbed the incoming fire, its projectors flaring brightly before winking out their sacrifice, adding to the realism of the display. On the Accountability's bridge, the air crackled with contained energy. The deck plates vibrated with the distant fury of the Cairn assault. "The convoy is clear of the primary threat vector," Jorik reported, his voice tight with awe. "They slipped right through the gap left by the Praetor's command ship. The transports are making for the nebula on schedule. One of our lattice corvettes, the Spark, took a stray hit." Wren added, his face grim. "Hull breach in the aft engineering section. They're venting coolant, but the crew is secure. They've sealed the compartment." A cost. Rostova logged it. "Tell them to fall back. Their work is done," she ordered. She watched the main lumen where the real human fleet, now revealed, was moving not away from the Cairn, but parallel to them. They weren't just running. They were repositioning. They were setting the board for the next move. Their ledger was about to be balanced. A furious broadcast tore across the channels, the Praetor's voice distorted with rage. "You will not escape! Your deception is a coward's trick. I declare you fugitive debtors. No port will harbor you. No truce will protect you. Surrender now, or we will render you to dust." To emphasize his point, the Cairn fleet reoriented, ignoring the now fading ghost images. They began a powerful, coordinated burn, pushing their engines to the limit. They were shepherding the human convoy, leaving them only one viable path, a straight run into the swirling, chaotic gases of the Calypso Nebula. It was a classic ambush tactic. Inside the nebula, sensors would be useless, and the Cairn would close in for the kill from prearranged positions. "He's playing from the oldest book in the universe," Jorik muttered. Rostova allowed a thin smile. "It's the only one he's ever read. That's why he can't imagine we've already written the next chapter." "Admiral," Solon interjected, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "I am detecting something new. The Praetor is broadcasting a high-bandwidth, encrypted tight-beam signal back towards the Cairn core worlds. It is piggybacking on their internal fleet communications. It is not standard military protocol." Another thread. Another mystery. "What is it, Solon?" Based on the packet structure, it appears to be a live, unedited tactical and visual feed from his command chair. "I believe he is broadcasting his glorious victory for a political audience at home." Rostova's smile widened. A performer. A vain, arrogant creature so certain of his script that he was filming the entire play. We would give him a finale he'd never forget. As the last of the civilian transports slipped into the shimmering curtains of the nebula, a teacher aboard the school ship Horizon's Promise gathered the children around a small holoprojector. "Don't be afraid," she said softly, her voice a beacon of calm in the tense vessel. "A nebula is just a stellar nursery, a place where new stars are born. It's mostly dust and gas, but it's very beautiful. Watch." She projected an image of vibrant, swirling clouds of hydrogen and helium, a cosmic watercolor painting. The low hum of the ship's engines felt a little deeper now, a bass note of urgency. On the accountability, the nebula's interference washed over the sensors, turning the crisp, tactical display into a blizzard of static. The Cairn fleet vanished from their screens, just as they had vanished from the cairns. "They're closing the door, Admiral," Jorik reported, his eyes fixed on the faint energy trails that were their only clue to the enemy's position. "They are taking up flanking positions just as we predicted." "Good," Rostova said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. "Solon, it's time to turn on the lights." A new command flew from the flagship. This time it wasn't projectors that launched, but a series of small, silent probes. They spread out into the densest parts of the nebula, inert and invisible. They were resonance probes, another piece of human ingenuity designed not for attack, but for reshaping the battlefield itself. They didn't emit a signal. They waited for one. "Hold the line and wait for the echo." Praetor Vex watched his own distorted sensor screen. The human fleet was blind and cornered. His ships were moving into position, their weapon systems charging. He could feel the eyes of the hegemony's inner circle watching his every move through the live feed. This would secure his family's prestige for a generation. "All ships," he commanded, savoring the moment. "Activate full-spectrum sensor sweeps. Pinpoint their locations. Prepare to fire on my mark." A storm of energy flooded the nebula as every Cairn ship unleashed powerful sensor pings desperate to cut through the interference. It was the signal the resonance probes had been waiting for. Instantly, they activated. They didn't just reflect the signals. They caught them, amplified them, and flung them back, redirected and multiplied 1,000-fold. The entire Calypso Nebula lit up not with light, but with information. The Cairn fleet was suddenly drowning in its own data. "Brace yourselves. The reckoning is here." On the bridge of the Cairn flagship, alarms shrieked in a dozen different tones. The tactical display became a nightmare of false contacts and looping feedback. Every sensor ping they sent out returned as 100 phantom ships charging from every direction. Their own targeting systems, designed for doctrinal precision, began locking onto their sister ships, unable to distinguish friend from foe in the hall of mirrors the humans had created. "Sir, I have lost contact with the third wing," an officer cried. "Weapons are offline. Our targeting computers are trying to solve an impossible equation," another shouted. Praetor Vex stared in horror. His perfect trap, his moment of glory, had been turned into a vortex of chaos, and the feed was still live. Everyone was watching. He saw 2 of his destroyers, their guidance systems utterly scrambled, veer dangerously close to one another, their engines flaring in panic. The entire Cairn fleet, a paragon of rigid formation and overwhelming force, was reduced to a panicked mob, blinded and deafened by their own strength. Their greatest weapon was now their greatest weakness. They had built a cage and we merely closed the door. "The Cairn formation is completely broken," Jorik said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "They are firing blind. Some are hitting each other. Solon is feeding their live broadcast back to us on a private channel. It's chaos." Rostova watched the feed for a moment. The praetor's face, once a mask of smug superiority, was now contorted in disbelief and rage. He was trapped in a feedback loop of his own, making his performance turning from a triumph to a farce in real time. The ultimate cost of the ultimatum doctrine wasn't just ships or lives. It was the shattering of its core premise that overwhelming force was an unanswerable argument. "Solon, is our path clear?" Rostova asked. The convoy is already navigating the pre-calculated safe corridor through the nebula's outer arms. "The Kirin are too disorganized to mount any effective pursuit," the AI confirmed. "We can be clear of the system in 4 hours." Rostova shook her head. "No, we're not leaving yet." The bridge crew turned to her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. Yorick stepped forward. "Admiral, we have them. We won. We should go." "We won the engagement, Yorick. We haven't won the argument," she replied calmly. "The Kirin only understand one thing, the ledger: an action and its consequence. They presented us with a bill. Now we present them with ours. This is how you teach a lesson that sticks." She turned to her communications officer. "Ren, open a channel. All system broadcast. Patch it directly into the Praetor's open feed if you can." "Yes, Admiral." Ren said, his fingers flying across his console. The scent of hot electronics briefly sharpened the air. The moment was here. The strategic reversal was complete. Now came the moral one. The human fleet was not a pack of wolves descending on a wounded animal. It was a teacher holding a failing student's exam paper, every error circled in red. Rostova stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the deck plating until her reflection was a faint outline on the lumen display, superimposed over the swirling chaos of the nebula. "Praetor Vex!" Her voice boomed across the system, calm, clear, and cold as the void itself. "This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Reconciliation Fleet. You came to our colony to enforce a doctrine of ultimatums. You presented a non-negotiable demand, assuming your power was the only truth that mattered." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You were wrong. The account is open. It is time to pay. Your fleet is currently incapacitated within a trap of your own design. Your sensors are your enemies. Your formation is your prison. Every shot you fire risks destroying one of your own. This outcome is a direct reflection of your philosophy, rigid, unimaginative, and brittle." On the Kirin bridge, Praetor Vex could only listen, his authority stripped away, his crew staring at him, waiting for an order he could not give. The live feed to his superiors was broadcasting his humiliation to the entire hegemony. "We are not leaving." Rostova continued, her voice hardening. "We are the new blockade. You have 2 options. Option 1, you may continue to flounder in the darkness you created, and we will simply wait until your fleet has crippled itself. Option 2, you will power down your weapon systems, every single one. You will then send a single unarmed shuttle to our coordinates to receive our terms. Not for your surrender, but for your education." A new timer appeared on every Kirin screen, counting down from 10 minutes. Their silence was the only answer they had left. "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Rostova stated the line a core tenet of her command. It was the principle she was willing to risk everything for. Solon, ever the calculator, had advised a clean escape. The odds of the Kirin reacting unpredictably, even suicidally, were non-zero. But Rostova was playing a different game, one with stakes far beyond a single system. "You have 10 minutes to comply, Praetor," she finished. "Choose wisely. Your audience is waiting." She cut the channel. The bridge of the accountability was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's life support. Every officer was frozen, watching the main screen, watching the chaotic icons of the Kirin fleet. For a long minute, nothing changed. The storm of false signals continued to rage. The panicked movements of the enemy ships continued unabated. Yorick shifted his weight, the subtle tension in his posture speaking volumes. "He's not going to do it," he breathed. "His pride won't let him." "His pride is irrelevant," Solon stated. "His captains are facing a tactical paradox. Their doctrine has no protocol for a scenario where their own systems are the primary threat. Logic dictates they will compel him to act." They did not understand choice. They only understood command. A crewman in the engine room of the Starglider paused his work listening to the Admiral's broadcast over the ship-wide comm. He looked at the massive coils of the transport's primary drive, the heart of their escape. He had a family in cryosleep, 2 decks above, waiting to be woken at their new home. He had been terrified, but now a different feeling settled in his chest. It was a hard, resolute feeling. It was pride. Then on the tactical display, one of the Kiern icons flickered. Its crimson weapon-ready light extinguished, replaced by a neutral blue. Another followed, and another. A wave of compliance washed over the enemy fleet as one by one captains and wing commanders made the only logical choice available to them. They were choosing survival over doctrine. "Weapons systems are powering down across their fleet, Admiral," Wren reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "He's lost control. His own people are overriding him." Praetor Vex had become a prisoner on his own bridge. His ultimatum had collapsed inward, its failure broadcast for all to see. He had demanded a tithe from the colony, and now his own command was being tithed from him by his subordinates. Their doctrine was a mirror, and it had finally shattered. "A single shuttle has launched from the Blade of Judgment," Jorik said, his voice low. "It's running cold. No weapon signatures. It's on an intercept course with us." Rostova nodded slowly. The first lesson was over. Now the tutoring would begin. "Let it approach. Yorick, keep our shields at half power. I want them to understand this is not a truce. It is a classroom." She knew this moment was critical. The Chiron had to understand that this wasn't just a tactical victory for the humans. It was a fundamental rejection of their entire way of thinking. Humanity had been tested by species like the Kiern before bullies who used power to create a brutalist form of order. And humanity had learned that you couldn't just defeat them. You had to teach them why they were wrong in a language they could not ignore. The language was math. The subject was consequence. Solenha Rostova said, her voice quiet but firm. "Prepare the lesson plan. I want a full tactical breakdown of the engagement, showing every decision point where the Praetor's adherence to doctrine led directly to this failure. Highlight the resources wasted, the tactical vulnerabilities created, and the command structure breakdown. Put it on a data slate." "Already prepared, Admiral," the AI responded. "I have also included a projection of their fleet's probable self-inflicted damage should they have remained hostile for another hour. The numbers are significant." "Good," she said. "When their envoy arrives, that slate is all we will give them. No speeches, no threats, just the numbers, just the bill for their education." This was the core of it. Mercy with teeth. The teeth weren't weapons, not primarily. They were the cold, hard facts of the ledger. They had shown the Kiern how to lose. Now they would show them why they had lost. The goal was not to create an enemy who would return with a better plan, but to create a student who might question the entire curriculum of violence. They came to collect a debt. They left with homework. The Kiern shuttle, a small angular craft, approached the accountability with cautious precision. It was a stark contrast to the aggressive posture of its mother fleet. On the bridge, the tension had eased, replaced by a focused, watchful energy. The cost of this victory had been minimal: one damaged corvette, a few hours of fuel, a spike in the crew's collective blood pressure. But the potential gain was immeasurable, a precedent. "The envoy is hailing us, Admiral," Wren said. "They are requesting permission to dock." "Permission denied," Rostova replied without hesitation. "Have them hold position 1,000 meters from our bow. We will transfer the data slate via drone. They are students, not guests." The message was clear. There would be no negotiation, no discussion, only the quiet damning evidence of their failure. The human fleet held its position, a silent ring of sentinels around the now impotent Kieran force. The nebula swirled behind them, a beautiful chaotic testament to the battle of wits that had just unfolded. The lights of the convoy, now safely on their way, were distant stars of hope. This was not an end. It was a beginning. A small drone detached from the Accountability's hull carrying the data slate. It was a tiny thing, a mote of technology against the vastness of space, but it carried the weight of a profound philosophical statement. It was the receipt for a lesson hard learned. As the Kieran envoy received the slate, Rostova knew the information would spread. The Praetor's live feed had ensured that. The story of the unbreakable ultimatum doctrine being dismantled by a handful of human tricks and a single unyielding commander would become a cautionary tale in the Kieran hegemony. "Solon, what are the odds that they actually learn from this?" Jorik asked, watching the shuttle begin its slow journey back to the Kieran flagship. "The probability of immediate widespread doctrinal change is less than 7%, Solon answered dutifully. However, the probability that Praetor Vex's career is over is above 98%. The seeds of doubt once planted in a rigid system can be remarkably resilient." "We'll take those odds," Rostova said. She looked out at the crippled fleet. They had come expecting to write in their ledgers with human blood. Instead, their own book had been balanced for them. She had flipped their strategy, exposed the cost of their beliefs, and done it all without taking a single Kieran life. Now they would count the true cost of their ultimatum. The human fleet remained in a holding pattern, engines humming with patient power. The air on the bridge began to smell of filtered relief. The faint scent of recycled oxygen tinged with the warmth of electronics that were no longer running at combat peak. Rostova allowed herself a slow, deep breath. The first phase was over. She had met their ultimatum with a lesson. But she knew the Kieran were a proud, stubborn people. The dismissal of a single praetor wouldn't be enough to change a culture. "Admiral," Wren's voice cut through the quiet. Multiple high-energy signatures just dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. "They're Kieran. Heavy cruisers. A lot of them." Jorik's head snapped around to face the tactical display. "It's a punitive fleet. They're not here to learn. They're here to erase the lesson." The icons appeared on the main lumen, a fresh wave of crimson sharks drawn by the blood in the water. They were not in a neat, arrogant formation. They were in a full battle, spread weapons already glowing hot. The first fleet had been a test. This was the real exam. The new arrivals ignored the disgraced Praetor's ships entirely, their target singular, the human fleet that had dared to defy them. They had failed the test, so they decided to burn the school. "They are broadcasting, Admiral," Wren said, his voice strained. "It's a system-wide decree from a new commander, Grand Praetor Vorlog." The voice that filled the bridge was deeper, harder, and held none of Vex's performative arrogance. It was the voice of a butcher. "Human vessel accountability. You have violated the sanctity of hegemony doctrine. You have interfered with a lawful tithing. Your tricks are clever, but they are meaningless before true power. There are no more negotiations. There are no more timers. We are the wall against which your kind will break. The new fleet began to advance a slow, inexorable tide of pure, destructive intent. Solon's voice was grim. Admiral, this force is 3 times the size of the first. Our mirror lattice will not be as effective against a dispersed assault formation. Their energy expenditure is massive. They are not trying to be efficient. They are trying to be overwhelming. Yorick clenched his fists. So we fight. Rostova stared at the advancing enemy, her mind racing. They had expected her to run. They had expected her to be a trickster, a rogue. They had not understood the core of her strategy. The lesson was not just about mirrors and echoes. It was about consequences. She had shown Vex the cost to his career. Now she would have to show Vorlog the cost to his fleet. We would not be the wall. We would be the hammer that broke it. In a quiet corner of the medical bay on the accountability, a medic was treating the bruised arm of a young ensign who had been thrown against a bulkhead during the earlier maneuvering. Just a sprain, the medic said gently. You'll be fine. The ensign nodded, wincing, as a biofoam cast solidified around his wrist. The ship's gentle vibration had been replaced by a deeper, more menacing thrum as the warship diverted all non-essential power to shields and weapon capacitors. The cost of victory was never zero. Solon Rostova commanded, her voice like steel. Vorlog is broadcasting on an open channel, correct? He wants everyone in this system, every ship, every colony, every listening post to hear him. That is correct, Admiral. He is making a statement. Then let's give him a co-author. She turned to Yorick. The resonance probes we used in the nebula, do we have any left? A full second wave, Admiral. We never deployed them. Excellent. A new plan was forming in her mind, one far more audacious than the last. The first trap had been passive, a mirror that reflected the enemy's own energy back at them. This one would be active. It wouldn't just reflect, it would focus. Prepare to deploy the remaining probes, she ordered, but not in a defensive screen. I want a new formation, a spear. Their blindness would now become our lens. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances. A spear formation with defensive probes made no tactical sense, but they trusted the Admiral. The order was relayed, and the small human fleet began to move corvettes and frigates, shifting into a long, thin line aimed directly at the heart of the advancing Cairn armada. It looked suicidal. Grand Praetor Vorlog watched the human maneuver on his main display and laughed a harsh, grating sound. The rabbit has bared its teeth. It thinks a desperate charge will save it. How pathetic. He gave the command. All ships advance at flank speed. Converge on their lead ship. Erase them. The Cairn fleet surged forward, a closing fist of warships, ready to pulverize the tiny human spear. They narrowed their sensor beams, focusing their energy for pinpoint targeting, a torrent of data slicing through the void. This was exactly what Rostova was counting on. They're taking the bait, Jorik said, his voice a whisper. Their sensor emissions are a goddamn floodlight. Deploy the probes. Now, Rostova commanded. The human corvettes ejected the second wave of resonance probes, but instead of a wide defensive cloud, they arranged themselves in a precise parabolic shape just ahead of the human fleet. They formed a massive invisible lens in space, a collector for the raging storm of energy the Cairn were pouring directly into it. Their strength was the fuel for our fire. The resonance probes activated, catching the torrent of Cairn sensor pings. But instead of scattering them into chaos, the parabolic formation focused them. All the energy, all the data from a fleet of over 100 warships was collected, amplified, and concentrated into a single needle-thin beam. Solon route the focused energy stream. Rostova ordered, her eyes locked on the enemy flagship. Target Grand Praetor Vorlog's bridge. The AI complied instantly. The invisible lens took the unfathomable amount of raw energy the Cairn were themselves broadcasting and shot it back at them in one overwhelming, coherent lance. It wasn't a weapon. It was their own voice amplified into a scream that could shatter glass. On the bridge of Vorlog's flagship, the universe ended in a flash of white noise. They were deafened by the sound of their own voice. Every sensor on the Cairn command ship overloaded simultaneously. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The main lumen display shattered, sending crystalline shards across the deck. Alarms blared and then died as their systems were fried by a data stream 1,000,000 times more powerful than they were designed to handle. The Grand Praetor was thrown from his command chair, his world reduced to a ringing in his ears and the smell of burning metal. His flagship was not destroyed. It was neutered. Blind, deaf, and dumb, it tumbled uselessly in space. And the focused beam, its primary target neutralized, did not stop. Guided by Solon's perfect calculations, it lanced out and for a fraction of a second washed over the bridges of the 10 ships closest to the flagship, delivering a scaled-down but equally debilitating blow. 11 ships, including their central command, were taken out of the fight in less than a second without a single shot being fired. The rest of the Cairn fleet faltered their advance, turning into a confused, panicked scramble. Their leader was gone. Their command structure was shattered. They had charged into what they thought was a trap, only to discover it was an anvil. "The enemy fleet is in complete disarray," Jorek reported, his voice filled with a stunned reverence. "They've lost all cohesion. They don't know what just happened." "They know," Rostova corrected him softly. "They felt it. They just don't understand it yet. That's the next part of the lesson." She took a steadying breath, the vibration of her own ship's deck, a comforting anchor in the sudden calm. Ren open another channel. It was time to deliver the grade. "Praetor Vorlog," Rostova's voice cut through the chaos of the Cairn fleet, a scalpel of sound in a symphony of destruction. "You came here to be a wall, but a wall is a static, brittle thing. It thinks only of stopping, not of redirecting. Your fleet's energy, your focus, your very aggression became the raw material of your own defeat. We did not fire a single shot. We simply held up a lens and allowed you to burn yourselves with your own light." The surviving Cairn captains listened, stunned from their rattling bridges. The air tasted of scorched wiring and the bitter copper of fear. On dozens of ships, crews scrambled to contain electrical fires and tend to officers knocked unconscious by exploding consoles. The human admiral's voice was not triumphant. It was clinical, the detached tone of a physician explaining a diagnosis to a terminal patient. They had mistaken an autopsy for a battle. "Your command structure is decapitated." Rostova continued, her words echoing in the sudden, vast silence of the Cairn command channels. "Your formation is broken. Your doctrine has failed you twice in 1 hour in 2 different ways. The first time it was too rigid to adapt to a lie. The second time it was too aggressive to recognize a trap of its own making. There is a flaw in your philosophy, a crack that runs through the very foundation of your hegemony." She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. "This is not a negotiation. This is a final accounting. Your punitive action has failed. Your ultimatum is void. Now you will be given a choice. Not a demand, but a choice. It is a concept you may need to learn." Their entire culture was built on the absence of choice. On the bridge of the Cairn heavy cruiser, inevitable retribution. A young captain named Kalen stared at his tactical display. Their Grand Praetor's icon was a dead gray. The command wing was silent. All around him the fleet drifted a body without a head. Rostova's voice was the only authority left in the system. He saw the logic in her words, a terrifying, beautiful mathematics that his own training had never conceived of. "You have two paths," Rostova's voice declared. "Path 1, you may continue this pointless aggression. You can attack, and we will defend. We will use your own energy against you again and again, and we will dismantle your fleet piece by piece. We will record every moment of it and broadcast it on every channel, a permanent record of your failure." Another pause, this one heavier than the last. "Path 2, you can learn. You can begin to balance your own ledger. You will cease all hostile action. You will then dedicate your fleet to a new task. You will escort our civilian convoy safely to its destination as a shield against the pirates and scavengers that plague this nebula. You will pay your debt not in collars or blood, but in service." This was not a surrender. It was a repurposing. "You have 5 minutes to make a collective decision," Rostova concluded. "Your remaining senior captain will signal your intent. We will be waiting." The channel closed, leaving the Chiron fleet alone with the ghosts of her words and the wreckage of their certainty. Immediately, the Cairn internal channels exploded into a frenzy. "It's a trick," bellowed the commander of the 3rd Assault Wing, a hardliner named Grohl. "She means to disarm us and execute us. We fight. We die with honor." "What honor?" Captain Kalen shot back, his voice cutting through the static. "Our Grand Praetor was defeated by an echo. Our command wing was blinded by their own sensors. Our doctrine is a failure. Continuing this fight is not honor, it is suicide." And a dozen other voices joined the fray, a schism tearing through the heart of the fleet. The hardliners, raised on generations of unshakable dogma, could not process a defeat that wasn't physical. The pragmatists, faced with undeniable tactical evidence, saw only one logical path. The Chiron fleet, once a monolithic instrument of power, was now a fractured council on the verge of a civil war. Their unity was their greatest weapon, and we had just turned it on itself. "Admiral," Solon reported, "I am monitoring their internal communications. Approximately 60% of their remaining captains are arguing for compliance. 40%, led by Captain Grohl of the Unbending Will, are advocating for a final suicidal charge." "He's a true believer," Jorik growled, watching Grohl's ship begin to power its weapon systems. "He'd rather die for a broken idea than live with a new one." "It's the last stage of grief," Rostova said calmly. "Denial, then anger. He's not ready for bargaining yet." She watched the tactical display, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. The hardliner faction was a significant threat. They could still do immense damage to her fleet, and more importantly, to the convoy. This was the 3rd escalation, the one she had feared. Not a battle of tactics, but a battle of wills. On the colony world of Kepler's Promise, the governor and her council watched the broadcast from the human fleet. The first victory had brought cheers. The second had brought awed silence. Now they watched the icons of the dissenting Cairn warships glow with renewed menace. A young council member, her face pale, looked at the governor. "They're going to fight again, aren't they?" The governor placed a calming hand on her shoulder, the faint tremor in her own fingers, the only sign of her fear. "The Admiral hasn't failed us yet," she said, her voice more a prayer than a statement. Suddenly, Grohl's faction of ships broke formation. They didn't charge the human fleet. They did something far more desperate. They turned on the other Chiron ships. They had decided that if the school must burn, they would start with the students. Lances of crimson energy erupted from the hardliner ships, striking not at the humans, but at the engines of Captain Kalen's cruiser. The inevitable retribution shuddered its port engine, exploding in a silent flash of orange and white. Grohl's voice screamed over the open channels, a raw sound of pure fanaticism. "Traitors, you will not dishonor the hegemony with your cowardice. All who follow the humans' command will be purged. The doctrine is absolute." The Cairn fleet had turned on itself. The pragmatists, their weapons still cold, were now being fired upon by their own comrades. It was a massacre born of ideological collapse. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Jorik demanded, his hand hovering over the firing controls. "We can end this. We can take out Grohl's ships right now and kill hundreds of Cairn in the process, validating his belief that we are nothing but butchers." Rostova countered, her voice sharp. This was the moment, the final test of her own doctrine. "No, we will not answer their fanaticism with our firepower." Solon's synthesized voice was flat, but held a new weight. "Admiral, my calculations indicate that allowing the Cairn to fight amongst themselves presents an unacceptable risk to the convoy. The most logical course of action is to eliminate Captain Grohl's ships immediately. The probability of mission success would be 94%. Rostova looked at the AI's impassive icon, then at the brutal chaos unfolding on the lumen. "Your logic is sound, Solon, but your definition of mission success is too narrow. The mission wasn't survival. It was precedent. We are not here to win a fight. We are here to end a philosophy," she declared. "Jorik, bring our shields to full power." Wren broadcast this to the entire Cairn fleet, Grohl's ships included. She took a breath, the recycled air humming in her lungs. "Captain Grohl," she began, her voice a stark contrast to his screaming rage, "you believe your honor demands a final battle. You believe you are the last true defender of your doctrine. But you are not defending it. You are demonstrating its ultimate fatal flaw, that any belief system that demands death over adaptation will inevitably consume itself." She turned to her tactical officer. "Jorik, I want our corvettes to move, not to attack, to rescue." They expected a sword, and we sent a shield. The small, swift human corvettes surged forward, their engines flaring blue. They bypassed Grohl's warships entirely and placed themselves directly between the hardliners and their targets, the drifting, damaged ships of the Cairn pragmatists. Human shields glowed to life, absorbing the furious barrage meant for Kalen's crippled cruiser. The deck of the Accountability vibrated as its own shields took a glancing blow from a stray weapon discharge. "Shields holding at 87%, Jorik called out. "The corvettes are in position. They're taking a pounding, but they're holding." On the bridge of the inevitable retribution, Captain Kalen watched in utter disbelief as a human ship, an enemy vessel, deliberately took fire to protect his own. It was an act so contrary to the Cairn way of war that it broke something in his mind. It shattered the last pillar of the doctrine he had served his entire life. He looked at the human corvette, its shields flaring like a miniature sun, and saw not an enemy but a teacher. "All ships of my wing," Kalen broadcast, his voice shaking with a new, unshakable conviction. "Fire not on Grohl, fire on me." A short, controlled burst at my main reactor. His crew stared at him in horror. "Sir, that's suicide." "No," Kalen countered. "It's a statement. They could not be defeated by force, only by a superior idea." "Jorik, what is he doing?" Rostova demanded, her calm finally cracking. "I don't know, Admiral," Jorik replied, his brow furrowed in confusion. Before anyone could stop him, two of Kalen's remaining ships fired precise, low-power blasts at their own flagship's reactor housing. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The reactor didn't explode. It initiated an emergency plasma purge, venting incandescent clouds of energized gas into the void. The inevitable retribution became a beacon, a massive, brilliant flare of light and energy that completely outshone the weapons fire of the battle. It was a signal, a surrender. But it was also a plea and a warning. Kalen's voice came over the comm, directed at Grohl. "You see, Grohl, this is the end of your path. A blaze of pointless self-destruction. I will not let you drag the rest of us into your funeral pyre." The light from Kalen's ship washed over the battlefield, a moment of terrible beauty. It illuminated the human ships, their shields holding steady. It illuminated Grohl's ships, their guns suddenly falling silent as their crews watched the spectacle. The grand, suicidal gesture had stolen all the momentum from the hardliners' attack. "You cannot outshout a star." Captain Grohl watched his fanaticism finally sputtering out in the face of such an undeniable symbolic defeat. His enemy was protecting his victims. His victims were choosing symbolic suicide over engaging in his mad crusade. He was a general with no one left to fight, shouting into a void that refused to answer. One by one, the weapon lights on his ships winked out. The battle was over. The argument was won. Solon Rostova said, her voice quiet. "Update your calculations." "Recalculating," the AI responded after a moment. "The Admiral's chosen course of action, while carrying a higher initial risk, has resulted in the complete cessation of Cairn hostilities and the voluntary compliance of 99% of their remaining fleet. It has also established a powerful psychological precedent. Probability of long-term doctrinal shift in this sector has increased from 7% to 41%. I am updating my definition of mission success." The ledger is not just about numbers. It is about value. In the aftermath, a profound quiet settled over the system. The human fleet lowered its shields. The Cairn ships, both factions, floated in silence, their crews processing the enormity of what had just occurred. A cost had been paid. The corvette, Steadfast, reported minor shield burns and a strained power conduit. Kalen's flagship was crippled, but its crew was alive. The cost of victory was always tallied, always remembered. "Captain Kalen," Rostova broadcast, her voice now gentle, "your ship requires aid. We are sending medical and engineering teams." There was a long pause before Kalen replied, his voice thick with an emotion Rostova could not name. "We accept. Thank you, Admiral." The transfer was made. Human medics and engineers unarmed crossed the void to help a defeated enemy. It was the final, unanswerable move in Rostova's long game. She had not just broken their fleet, she had broken their worldview and then offered a hand to help them build a new one. They came to take a tithe and were given a gift instead. Over the next several hours, a new order emerged from the chaos. Under Captain Kalen's direction, the Cairn fleet honored the second path. They powered down their weapons, re-established their command structure under his pragmatic leadership, and began the slow, humiliating, and ultimately transformative process of escorting the human convoy. Captain Grohl and his fellow hardliners were taken into custody by their own people, their fate to be decided by a hegemony that had just witnessed their doctrine's public implosion. Rostova stood on her bridge watching the main lumen. The icons of the Cairn fleet, once a terrifying crimson, were now a neutral blue. They had formed a protective ring around the civilian transports, their powerful warships now acting as shepherds. The image was so profoundly strange, so fundamentally hopeful, that it almost didn't seem real. A formal data burst arrived from Captain Kalen. It was a single file, a public entry for the official hegemony ledger. It stated that the ultimatum doctrine, as practiced by Praetor Vex and Grand Praetor Vorlog, had been proven tactically and philosophically bankrupt. By order of the ranking senior officer of the Calypso engagement, its use was suspended indefinitely, and a full review was mandated by the Cairn High Command. The precedent was locked. Yorick stood beside Rostova, shaking his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like it. You didn't just win. You taught them how to lose." "That's the only kind of victory that lasts, Yorick," she said softly. The lights on the bridge seemed warmer now, the air cleaner. The faint hum of the ship's core was a steady, reassuring heartbeat. The convoy, with its strange, powerful new escort, finally reached the edge of the nebula. Before them lay open space and the bright, welcoming star of their new home. The lumen display showed the Cairn escort holding their positions at the nebula's border, their duty fulfilled. As the last human transport cleared the system, the lead Cairn cruiser, Kalen's temporary command, dipped its bow in a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. They had learned that power is a weapon, but strength is the wisdom to know when not to use it. They had learned that a debt can be paid in service and that an account can be balanced with mercy. They came to teach a lesson about ultimatums, and were in turn taught a lesson about choice. The universe was wide and filled with violence, but today in this small, forgotten system, a seed of something new had been planted. They had come to write an ending. But instead, they had been given a new beginning.